You gotta have knowledge for life. You gotta have knowledge for life. You gotta have.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. This is Steve Muhammad coming to you from Knowledge for Life, and we are about to show a powerful clip from the 16th anniversary of the Million Man March. This one is coming from the Nation of Islam's research department. They held a conference, a powerful conference. This clip is showing Sister Ava Muhammad talking about the very powerful and illuminating book, How White Folks Got So Rich. Before we go into the clip, I wanted to show you, this is a CD that I got from the 16th anniversary of the Million Man March, and I want to encourage all of you who are watching to visit this site right here. This site has links to all the independent artists. We have to support our independent artists because you may know that the music that is coming from these independent artists today is by far better than what's being put on the Zionist corporate controlled mainstream media radio stations. Support our artists, boycott those artists that won't put out a positive message, that use the African drums to ride the message of the enemy into our community. Boycott that kind of stuff. Support our independent artists. They are just as talented, and the beats sound just as banging as what you hear on mainstream media. With that, I want to go ahead and leave you as I came before you with the greeting words of peace and prosperity, and may God continue to bless your family. Assalamu alaikum.
The Beneficent, the Merciful. I bear witness there is no God but Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is his servant, and I greet all of you again in the words of peace of Assalamu alaikum. In Study Guide 21, entitled The Education Challenge, a new educational paradigm for the 21st century, Minister Farrakhan sets forth in his chosen role as spiritual leader of the great transition and dramatic change on the earth that is occurring right now. He sets forth his argument for the truth that we are at the end of a particular time in history. And that is the time that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad referred to as predicated on an idea of dominion and rule. And as Dr. Ridgely explained earlier, from Minister Farrakhan, that is the architecture of white supremacy. That, as a fact, an objective fact, has come to an end. The turmoil that the globe is undergoing is the product of the resistance to God's declaration and the end of the time of that rule. Those people, the Adamic race, the product of the experimentation of Dr. Yaqub in his search for what it was in us that caused the catastrophic act of rebellion 66 trillion years ago, and through that experimentation brought out the Caucasian people. But it was Allah who allowed them to have that dominion and rule so that we would be forced to confront that which was in us that had disconnected us from our relationship with Allah. And so now we are at the end of that, but there is a massive resistance on the part of those in the position of rulership to stepping down. And so they will have to be removed because they will not leave. But President Woodrow Wilson, among others, that you will learn in great detail of in studying this material and listening to the scholars here and really throughout the Nation of Islam and the black community, we are now embarking on what he called for, a new educational paradigm. One of the things, I'll give you just a quick example of why we have to have our own independent schools. We always are taught about the 13th Amendment, and Negroes love the 13th Amendment. They're grateful for it, and if you ask a Negro, what is the 13th Amendment? It freed the slaves. Well, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which was passed by the Senate April 8, 1864, and the House on the 31st of January, 1865, and then ratified December 6, 1865, abolished slavery as an institution. What is not taught in the U.S. public school system is that 13th Amendment is the second 13th Amendment. Right. The first and real 13th Amendment, when there was a whole Congress in session, was passed prior to the Civil War in February of 1861. That 13th Amendment guaranteed the legality and perpetuity of slavery. It did not end it, it guaranteed that it would continue forever. This amendment was passed by the Senate and the House. And the only reason it was not ratified is the Civil War started.
Go ahead.
But the final version of the 13th Amendment was passed during the Civil War when the South was not present, because it had seceded and formed another nation. So they were not there. So the violence, the venom that you and I are witnessing in response to the election of a black man to the presidency is simply a manifestation of the fact that white people, the majority of white people, because the second 13th Amendment, even though it passed in the absence of the South, many northern states, congressional representatives, were against it as well. It narrowly passed, even with the absence of the South. The majority of white people in this country are vehemently opposed to you and I having any role in this nation whatsoever except as labor. And when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, that was simply a war powers action by the commander-in-chief. And what it wasn't so much that Lincoln loved black folks, but as has been said, this was a struggle over a commodity, you and I. And the removal of the slaves from the South was like taking their power away from them. We're going to take your slaves because you are in an act of rebellion. But moving forward, now Minister Farrakhan lifted a quote from President Woodrow Wilson that he placed in Study Guide 21 that must be understood. Now the research department in the latest book, you can just carry this with you. Yeah. And I've got a vision of this being on all the subways and planes. How white folks got so rich. How? By what method? So he quoted Woodrow Wilson, but I want to back up in the book because the research department, in following up on Minister Farrakhan's statement, in reference to the fact that the education system you and I are in is really designed to serve our slave master. But I'm reading from our book that, when I say our book, I mean us as a people. I'm not a writer of this book, but this is awesome. As soon as you flip it open, you'll be enlightened. During his White House tenure from 1913 to 1921, President Woodrow Wilson reinforced racial segregation as official United States government policy. This included the wholesale firing of blacks in government positions throughout America and replacing them with whites. Stop right there. This is why Rick Perry, the Texas governor, Ku Klux Klan, niggerhead, branch, ready to secede, has said, he said, when I get in office, I will do everything I can to make the federal government inconsequential. Meaning that the federal government will not tamper with our ability to deal with our niggers the way we see fit. One day in 1913, the Atlanta postmaster fired 50 black messengers and gave their jobs to whites. When questioned why he did that, he said whites had families to support. And in any case, he was not obliged to give any reason. The racial firings were perfectly legal and expected, and under Woodrow Wilson, required. Now that specific quote, and by the way, before Barack Obama assumed the presidency, Woodrow Wilson was considered the most intellectual man to ever sit in the White House. He had been president of Princeton. Now this is what he declared at a speech. We want a class of persons to have a liberal education. And we want another class of persons. Who are they? A very much larger class of necessity in every society to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult, manual tasks. To go on and how white folks got so rich, that very much larger class consisted of black people whose public schooling over the last century ensured that black students fulfilled that inferior role designated by Wilson. Of the 15 states that spent the least on education, 14 were in the South. And let me bring this to a close very quickly. Compulsory education in the United States, which is relatively recent, is a product of that thinking. Why is attendance in the public school system mandatory? The Holy Quran says there is no compulsion in religion. If there's no compulsion in religion, which is the base for any educational system, how can there be compulsion in education? That is why it's essential that we continue to share the belief system of our slave master. And that is why they fight Islam tooth and nail, so that you and I will remain followers of a warped, deformed Christianity that we were taught, that makes us docile and compliant with being taught to be a mule and a burden bearer whose only goal in life is to seek approval and acceptance and to qualify to work for white people. So physical slavery, because it, in its nature, dulled intellectual activity. We don't imagine what it did to the brain for our parents to engage in back-breaking work day after day. Can you imagine, how do you develop communication skills when nobody talks to you? Where do you get your dreams from and your goals from when you don't know anything beyond where you work on that plantation? And you've never been off of it, and your mother never left it, and your grandmother never left it. And yet, as Dr. Ritchie says, when we left there, we were able to become entrepreneurs. So they weren't able to extinguish that light. And so they had to create a new structure to sustain it, which is this public education system. And if you saw the movie Avatar, and James Cameron said, he made that movie, he had the dream of this planet as a child. But he rewrote the script during the Iraq War as a protest of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And that movie had a message of the wickedness of white people who, when you sit on natural resources that they want, they never think to negotiate with you. They come in and they annihilate you. And those people were black, but he painted them blue because it would not have made it to the screen. Just like Mel Gibson said, he wanted his Jesus to be black, but he never would have gotten it on the screen. Because why are you so bent in Avatar? We tried to give them schools. Why do I want you to give me a school when you're here because you killed your planet and you have nowhere to live? I'm up here flying birds in the air and I'm in complete harmony with nature. So why do I need to learn from you? Why did Negroes say stay in school? So you stay a slave. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said teach them young, teach them hard, and teach them fast. And lastly, sisters. And I say this all the time. You remember in Aliens, they kept coming no matter how many they killed. And finally Sigourney Weaver said, who is laying the eggs? A nation can rise no higher than its woman. 93% of elementary school teachers in America are white females. She is helping her man stay on top of us because she is filling our children from kindergarten to the 6th grade with a sense of inferiority. We gotta take our children out of their family. I didn't eat this.
You finished? Her book is called The Birth and Rise of the Original Woman.
I'm striving, man. I got devils in my soul.